What I do with people is show them how to detach from the identity of anything that sits externally, in a job, in a profession, in something that filters out there, and allows them to own an identity within themselves where they can feel comfortable, where they can take them to different relationships, different jobs, different careers, and feel completely content and at ease with that.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Consult a qualified professional for your needs. Views expressed are those of the hosts and guests and not necessarily those of Meet Your Mental Helper Podcast LLC or its affiliates. We are not responsible for actions taken based on this content.
Hi, I'm Jim Weisbecker. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Arizona, Colorado, Florida, and Ohio. The reason I started the Meet Your Mental Helper podcast is kind of selfish in a way because I just love talking shop with colleagues. But I also think the world needs to know about some of these people. And the reason I say that is I'm amazed at how much they know. And I think to myself, they should be on a podcast. But they're not celebrities. They're just everyday counselors, therapists, coaches, psychologists that work in our communities and grind it out to help us heal and to help us grow. So let's meet today's mental helper. And welcome to Meet Your Mental Helper. Joining us from London is Matt Young. Matt is a specialist in the mechanics of anxiety and fear, helping people navigate the emotional patterns that keep them stuck in the past. Today we're exploring how to transition from simply having an emotion to actively managing a response to it. Matt, it's great to have you on Meet Your Mental Helper.
Thank you very much, James. I'm really pleased to be here, so thank you for having me.
And Matt, when a client says they have anxiety, how do you help them reframe it as something they are experiencing rather than who they are?
Great question to start. I think from my personal experience in this, and I'm happy to touch on that in a moment, that we all use emotions in different ways depending on what the circumstance, the event, that our perception of reality requires. And so when a client comes to me and says that they have anxiety, I'm looking at the reason as to why this person would choose to use this trait. So for example, I have someone who comes to see me and they have a fear and anxiety around public speaking, the number one fear, amongst humans. And they say, you know what, before I go to public speak, I feel really anxious. My anxiety is heightened. So straight away, I'm looking at that and I'm looking to understand, why is this person using anxiety? Well, the core, from my experience in this, the core way would be because if I use this anxiety and I make it elevated enough, it will keep me away from dealing with the fear of stepping out on stage and maybe being judged, maybe being ridiculed, maybe people questioning me. And so when I'm working with a client, I look to reframe it, as you called it, in a way where we don't have emotions, we use and we do them. And what we need to simply understand is the emotional mechanism of what we all have and why we are using these emotions.
So with anxiety, I know some of the growth mindset people will say, if you have anxiety, it's because whatever it is your anxiety is about, it's important to you. And do you feel that fits?
Yes, in the sense that we're not anxious over necessarily the things in life that we have no interest or care over, because we would just dismiss those. With that being said, I've worked with many people who have anxious traits and anxiety around certain things with driving or certain areas of getting into certain elevators or partaking in a certain social activity. And it's not that it means so much to them, but a lot of the time what we find is that people have emotional experiences of life. For example, there was that one time that person stepped into an elevator, it went from the second to the third floor, and on the way, it got stuck. And that leaves an emotional imprint, an emotional experience for that person now, where they associate that elevator equals anxiety. The same reason if someone had a panic attack in a car, it leaves the same neuro association. And so, yes, in the sense that the growth mindset type of approach would say, you know, what is the things that we care about? But on the other side of that, it simply comes down to the core essence of where has the emotional impact occurred? And therefore, that's where the anxiety sits.
Matt, I'll share a personal experience. Maybe I'm a strange person, but I once had a optometrist, not a medical doctor, tell me I was going to go blind. This was about half a lifetime ago. He said, he was looking in my eyes. He goes, "You are going to go blind." I did not worry about that at all. And once I saw a medical doctor, he cleared it up quickly and said, "No, that's not the case." But if I have to go to downtown Phoenix, I will have anxiety about finding a parking place.
Mm.
So I will have anxiety about little things,
Mhm.
but I don't know why life or death things I don't.
Mhm. I think when it comes to some of these situations, and it's a great contextual thing because anxiety doesn't show up in the grandeur of events like that, for example. You know, you hear something like that, I would say the common reaction would be to worry, would be to fret, would be to stress, overwhelm, these types of things, be anxious about that possibility. But like I said, anxiety doesn't show up in the grandeur of events. Anxiety shows up based upon our perception of an event. And so, for example, if I've had many experiences where I'm driving to Phoenix and I know how tough it is to find a parking space, I know that this is going to cause me some stress. I know that this is going to cause me some worry, overwhelm, whatever it may be. I might produce a little anxiety on the way to that because I know based upon experience that parking in Phoenix is going to be a nightmare. And so when that happens, I reiterate, it's not in the grandeur of the event, but in our perception of that event. That's why some
Okay.
people can stand out on stage and speak in front of thousands and thousands of people and not bat an eyelid about it. And someone else might, for example, not feel comfortable in speaking openly in their own home. It's how we perceive these moments based on personal experience.
Well, that's a great way that you clarified that. So massive events like that don't necessarily trigger it. It's more of our playing it out in our mind ahead of time as to what's going to go wrong or what's
Right, exactly.
negative. Yeah.
It's exactly like what you said there. For you,
Hmm.
when you heard that information, you've obviously internalized that in a certain way, maybe made peace with it, maybe felt like, you know what, I'm going to get a second opinion. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go and speak to a
Sure.
professional medical doctor and dealt with that in a way where the anxiety wouldn't grow.
And for listeners, Matt is one of the UK's leading coaches focused on debilitating fear. He brings a technical background in neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, and a rapid transformation therapy, working with clients who have dealt with long-term barriers from chronic pain, panic attacks to phobias lasting decades. His approach is built on the idea that while our emotional barriers are internal, the tools to solve them are as well. How did you get interested in coaching, Matt?
The short answer is through failed personal experiences. You know, I was someone who, for many years, I was a professional football player. So for you guys, obviously stateside, it was a professional soccer player.
Okay.
And I almost lived a bit of a double life. You know, I'd present this whole football mask, if you like, identity, but behind the scenes, there was a shell of a man, is what I explain as. And someone who was very insecure, very fearful, anxious, I could say, thoughts, ruminating thoughts, these types of things. And so I was very much my own first client in that way. I would always try and find ways that I could help myself free myself from these fears, worries, doubts, dreads, overwhelms. And a lot of failed personal experiences, trying so many things that didn't quite work for me, trying so many different avenues to a point where life becomes so painful for me that I was like, I need to find, it's not like a nice to have at this stage. I must find solutions here. And then I went down a route of finding things that perhaps wouldn't been my first choice. There are things like NLP, things like hypnotherapy, things like life coaching, things that wasn't quite in RTT, wasn't in the same realm of where I went initially. And I started to see results for myself. And then when I started to see these things, I started to then want to help family. You want to help family, you then want to help friends. So after you help friends, you're like, holy, I'm onto something here. And then the energy, the impact, the drive to want to share that with people is still something that I have now many years down the line, hence why I do what I do. And so that's
Right.
really where it stemmed from.
So did you start with NLP or?
It's a good question. Where did I start? I believed in terms of a qualification standpoint, I started with a general life coaching qualification. And then that expanded into hypnotherapy and NLP and then various other sort of different certifications since then. But the basis of that is built on these three main foundations.
Mm-hmm. And for people that aren't familiar with NLP, would you maybe describe that a little bit?
So NLP stands for neuro-linguistic programming. And essentially neuro meaning the neural pathways and the way in which we communicate, linguistic, the language of how we communicate, and the programming of essentially how you can program that as a whole. The neural language of who you are and what we are and the wiring and the programming of that. Now, whilst I believe that it's a beautiful method, it's a beautiful technique, it has many, many great structures to it. It's not the standalone way that I work with my clients now, because I believe that it misses a few fundamental things that I draw from other therapies, other coaching methods, and I put a blend of these things together to be able to essentially help my clients now.
What would a typical client maybe look like for you?
A typical client for me would be, I've been fortunate enough at this stage, James, to work with thousands of people from around the world, from everywhere from LA to Toronto to Singapore to Cyprus to Norway to Australia, South Africa, all over the world. And when I'm working with people in the UK, wherever it may be, I'm never here to look at what their background is and what who they are as a person, because it's like it becomes a judgmental way. But one common factor that I notice is that every single one of them, they're hungry. They're hungry and they're determined to want more from themselves. They want more than the existence and the life of where they're currently living. Whether that's the fact that anxiety is limiting their life, or whether the fact that they feel like they've just hit a plateau and they want to go to the next level again. The one core thing that I notice from all of my clients from around the world is that there's a hunger, there's a drive, there's an underlying want and commitment within themselves to say, I'm not satisfied with where I am, I want more. And so that would be the typical client, if you like. And as we are in human form, we come in all different shapes and sizes in that way. And there's that common factor that is generally underneath.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned I was a shell of a man
Uh,
when you were a professional athlete. What was it you were looking for specifically?
Wonderful questions. I love these. For myself at that stage, if you'd asked me back then, what was I looking for? I wouldn't even know what you was talking about. What do you mean, what am I looking for? I'm not looking for anything. I'm a professional footballer. But at that stage, what I didn't realize is my whole identity of who Matt Young was buried in that professional football. Now, whilst I'm in that life, that's completely fine. But when that life comes to a crashing halt, and all of a sudden the tag of Matt Young professional footballer is no more, there is no substance behind that. And that's when it really hit me of, what is there now? You've been a shell of a man. You've been a shell of someone who has presented this identity of who you are, but underneath to that, who is Matt Young underneath? that's when I started to ask those questions like what you said there. What is it you actually are looking for? What is it that actually matters to you? Who is it that you actually want to be? Who are you? What are your core values, morals, driving forces in life? What is it that actually inspires you? Because for so long, my life, my mind, my being, my emotions, my soul was buried in football to a point where I never had to delve into any of that. I never had to look at that side of myself. But when that come to a stop, it forced me to do that. And honestly, it's probably one of the greatest blessings of my life that it did do that, because it's
Yeah.
allowed me to find new depths to myself that I can now help people with.
Yeah, and an endeavor like being a professional footballer, you are probably spending an enormous amount of time training, practicing, playing. If there's an off season, you're still training or recovering or whatever. I'm
Mhm.
guessing it's just all consuming.
It is. And I used to make it that way as well. I was
You were
back at
all
that
in.
stage. I used to make myself train even when it wasn't needed. I would make myself do more even when there wasn't a requirement to. Even when it was off season and we was told to take a break, I wanted to do more. At the time, I used to just say, you know what, it's just because I'm dedicated. It's just because I'm committed. And that was very, very true. I was very committed, still am, very dedicated, still am. However, what I now know is because my worst moments come from when I wasn't doing that and I was at home in my apartment on my own and the thoughts start going. What's it? And all of the untapped into parts of me start to rear themselves. The best way I could distract myself from dealing with any of those things is to get straight back into football mode.
Mm.
And so that was a life for me that I exhausted for many years. And like I say, it's a mask for having to deal or avoid dealing with what really mattered underneath.
And I'm guessing you probably have clients who maybe they're not a professional athlete, but they've been the manager of the widget department for 25 years, working long hours, um, putting everything into that career. And then maybe there's a layoff, or maybe the company's moving their production facility somewhere and they're in that same situation. Do you find that?
Absolutely. I mean, as human beings, as you say that, I've worked with people, athletes, directors, CEOs, but also, university students, single parents, all people from all sorts of backgrounds. And one of the key things of what I found is as human beings, we like to attach ourselves to identities. So, as you said there, the person who's been the widgets manager for the last 25 years, then all of a sudden they take a new career path and they feel like they've lost themselves. Reason being is for the last 25 years, that's how they know themselves. They are Matt, the widgets manager, or Matt, the teacher, or Matt, the air host, or whatever it may be. And so a big part of my work, of what I'm doing with people, what I do with people, is show them how to detach from the identity of anything that sits externally in a job, in a profession, in a something that filters out there and allows them to own an identity within themselves where they can feel comfortable, where they can take them to different relationships, different jobs, different careers, and feel completely content and at ease with that.
So you're helping them disconnect from that external would be the widget manager and
Correct.
go and focus more internally on themselves and what their strengths are, what they know.
Correct. Yes. I mean, don't get me wrong. We're all very passionate to achieve things out there. We all want, a lovely home, a lovely car on the driveway, a lovely relationship, a lovely career and job, and, lovely holidays. They're wonderful. They're beautiful things. But what I find is they don't define a person. Where I see the issue comes is when we start to think that these things do define me. How many zeros are in my bank account tells me how much self-worth I have. How successful I am in my career tells me how successful I am as a person. These things, it's a slippery slope of life that we can get into when we attach who we are to the external things of life, because as life can show us, things can change that fast. And when that happens, we then find ourselves in a situation where I get laid off from my job after 25 years of being a widgets manager. And all of a sudden now, where am I? Who am I? That was the situation I found with football, professional football. So yeah, that's very much the path that I take with my clients.
Did it happen quickly for you? Was it an injury or age or
No, so
all the above?
no, so for me it was a time in my life where I was having some personal issues off the football pitch as well. I was having some things going on in my personal life that wasn't too great. And in this life of a professional career, I remember it really clearly. It was just one day, just had a chat with the manager of the football team at the time, and he just said, "No, it's not going to be here for you." And I remember that particular day, I drove home, or to where I was staying at the time, and I remember I got pulled up on the driveway of where I was living at the time, and I just sat there for maybe 45 minutes and didn't know what to do. I was like, "Well, I don't know what to do anymore." And it hit me like a ton of bricks in that moment, because that was the first realization I'd had that you're not a professional footballer right now. And then I tried.
So who are you, right?
Exactly. So who am I? And it was
Uh-huh.
45 minutes of sitting there, and there was tears, there was emotions involved. And eventually I tried to claw my way back into professional football naturally, as what I would do. And then I did, and then I come back out of it again, and then I went part-time. And then after then it was a sort of a gradual decline out of it. But that initial time when I dropped my friend off at the train station and I was like, where do I go now? And I remember saying to him, where should I go? He went, just go home. I'll give you a call. And I was like, I don't want to go home. I want to go to a football club. And I went home, sat on my driveway for 45 minutes. And that's the first realization I really had of, well, like, this is really happening now. Like, things are changing. And I wouldn't say things changed in that moment. It was still a very painful journey ahead, but that was the first time it hit me.
That is something I think a lot of people go through too. I've seen it with um, especially women when their children leave home. Their children are grown adults now. They leave home and they're like, who am I now? I've been a mom. I've been a caretaker. I've been, taking kids to games. Now it's just a quiet house.
It's such a beautiful example, because it's true. Because I'm not yet a parent myself, but parenthood, I'm sure for the many people listening, they'll say, and from the people that I've spoke to, it's like the most beautiful journey ever. It's the greatest gift of life. And as you say, for the last 18 years, someone's identity has been mum, dad, primary carer of said child. And then all of a sudden, one day they head off to college, they head off to university, they move out, and then we go, "L- what happens to me now? Where am I now?" What I've known for the last 18, 19, 20 years, whenever it is that they move out, we go, where am I now? And so it's a beautiful example, because again, I work with many mothers and fathers who have been in that situation, who are then trying to rediscover, uncover that part of them that they want to feel back in control, where they want to have that feeling of empowerment again that, they're struggling at that particular time with.
And having been through you could call it a bottoming out moment yourself, or hitting rock bottom with an identity issue or maybe an identity crisis, how does that help you with clients who come to you with the same thing? How does that give you an edge?
Well, I think you truly connect with people, not through words, but through energy and through experience. I think words sometimes can be surface level. Words can be very performance like. We can all say lovely things. I think what people feel is something that's true, is something that's real. And I don't think you can really touch someone in an emotional soul sense unless you've been there yourself. if you've been there yourself, you can talk from the heart, you can talk candidly, you can talk truthfully because you know what that experience is. And at the stage of where I am with my work, I have some qualifications, I have some certifications, I have some things in that area. I have an insane depth of knowledge and research, and that's great. That's wonderful. But I've also lived this. And so when I put the marriage of those two things together, I find I can connect with people, not through my words, but through the fact that people feel that, and then I have some strategies that are able to help them. So when you say, how does that give me an edge? I would say it gives me the possibility of helping a client more because they understand firsthand that I've been in their shoes. I understand how they feel. I know where the mind goes. I know the way in which we respond. But more importantly, I know how we can break out of this. And then when they start to experience that shift, it becomes less about me and more about their experience.
Yeah, that shared experience builds quite a bit of connection. And you mentioned they sense that energy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like, I could do the depths of research into what I believe it's like to try and find a car parking space in Phoenix. And I could read the books and read the reports and read online forums, and I could really get an in-depth knowledge. Or you can tell me just from pure experience. Who's going to know more? You are. Because you know exactly the way that Phoenix drivers behave. You know the way that they act. You know that if there's a space open, you have literally 5 to 10 seconds before someone else is going to swoop straight in there. And when it comes to these moments like this is where I can really connect with people in an emotional sense because, like I say, I've been there. And that energy, as you called it, is what allows me to connect and ultimately help people.
When you started doing research, it sounds like you researched your way out of your situation. Am I correct? Or did you go to a coach yourself? Or
Initially, yes. Like I said, I was my own first client. And initially, I would finish football training at the time. I was playing part-time football at that time. And I would bury myself in books and I would watch videos and I would join courses online. And you're right, I tried to research my way out of it. But what I did find in truth and with honesty is that I knew so much. I knew so much. I could tell you why we do what we do, the things, the behaviors, all sorts of things. And mentally, I knew the book. But I still hadn't experienced that true sense of freedom and reclaiming who I was and that feeling of feeling in control emotionally. I still hadn't experienced that. And then I enrolled on a couple of courses in a short period of time that really created a real emotional impact within me. And in varying different courses, and it really was an enlightening process for me that I started to recognize that part of me that I was like, yeah, you know what, this is who I am. And I started to mold myself into this person who I see now. It's always been the same Matt Young, but I've created, I've created the depth of who I am based on the experiences and what I've put myself through. And so when I'm working with clients now, I give them an understanding, of course, but also the experiences, the emotional shifts that we create are really what stick for people because that's the lasting impact.
let's talk a little bit about some of the things you use. One of them is rapid transformational therapy, and you also do some hypnotherapy. But let's start with rational transformational therapy, RTT. Tell us what that encompasses.
So RTT was something that I learned maybe 5 to 6 years ago now. And being completely honest with you, I don't use that technique or that particular framework in its truest sense. It was something that I was incredibly grateful for learning and understanding because I really wanted to understand the subconscious mind and how we behave and why we do what we do. And RTT, and it was from a great, wonderful therapist called Marissa Peer, who really, really wonderful at what she does. It was her product of therapy and methodology that really helped people. And it was something that I learned and earnestly just applied, and I worked with clients with. Initially, it was the sole technique of what I used. But since then, as I say, I've found that it to be incredibly powerful, and it is very powerful. But I've found that it's not the true sense of how I like to deliver my work. And so it's pivoted since then. But there's some frameworks of understanding the subconscious mind and what it is that are incredibly, incredibly powerful for sure.
What would you say your main go-tos are now? Would it be NLP or would it be hypnosis? I know you're somewhat eclectic in the situation, but is there a particular thing you lean into more?
The short answer is no, there isn't. I think every personal situation is slightly different. Everyone receives information in a slightly different way. Everyone receives emotional shifts in a slightly different way. What I like to do is create a blend of some of these things, a blend of light visualization with a form of meditation, and then maybe a dynamic physiological shift within someone. And so the truthful answer is no. I don't necessarily see hypnotherapy and NLP and life coaching or whatever it may be. I don't see them as standalone techniques in their own way. I use them in a way that is incredibly powerful, I believe, but as a blend of these methodologies. And that's where I find that it can be just really, really powerful for people.
So you mentioned you feeling a shift and actually feeling it in your body. I've had some other guests on the podcast talk about that too, kind of the somatic part of how the emotions are showing up or the motivation is showing up. So tell me how you do that, where you meditation and then getting somebody to feel it physiologically.
Great. So the way I can explain this is that we are human transmission towers. We are emotional human transmission towers. And essentially we vibrate a frequency out into the world. We vibrate a certain energy out into the world. And what I believe is when we are in a low energy, low vibrancy, there's no real feeling within my body. I'm here. This is where people often get stuck with traits like anxiety, fear, worry, doubt, stress, overwhelm, depression, sadness, whatever it may be. And when we stay there for a period of time, we end up conditioning that process to be who I am. And we end up believing that this is who I am. Now, what I find is that when we create a bit more of a shift there, the word emotion, I like to say, comes from the word emotion, energy in motion. So when we create a little bit more vibrancy to our being, when we use our posture slightly different, the neural pathways that govern our parasympathetic nervous system, 80% of them are afferent, meaning they go from body to mind. So when we use our body in a different way, literally neurological signals are being sent to our brain of how to think differently. And so when that happens, and then I might create a little bit of energy in my work, or I might show someone a powerful breathing technique. And then I align their mind with a focus, with a drive, with a control, with a purpose that wants to uplift them. It creates literally that human transmission tower. It creates a completely different frequency within that person. And the same way that they conditioned that lower place down here, I can show them very quickly how to condition that higher vibrancy up here. And when we can implement that, and I have some very, powerful practices and strategies and ways and experiences of how I show people this when my programs and seminars and things, when they experience that, it becomes like an awakening for people to go, huh, I never realized this. You know what? Now I have a choice. It's not just who I am, but I have a choice of who I get to be. And when that becomes, we get powerful. When we get powerful, we go, right, you know what? I'm going to dictate. And so that's a small way in which I do it. But oftentimes, that will start with a physiological shift. Like I say, 80% communicates this way, only 20% communicates mind to body. If we see it all the time, people are never going to think their way out of a problem.
Right. So I've had some experience where, I mean, I've read some research on DBT. It's a therapy model where they have the Mona Lisa smile. And if you smile just that much, the nerves in your face send the message to your brain that you're actually happy, even if you're not, that you're happier or in a better mood. Have you ever heard that one? And I've tried it myself, and it's weird, but it does work.
It does, and it's funny because I couldn't tell you the exact science behind it, but many years ago I did something very, very similar. Very similar. It was a cohort I was a part of, and it was very similar. It was the 2-minute method that the guy called it, and it was like 2 minutes, just have the biggest smile on your face and just hold it there. And it was the same, very, very, very same thing, and I'd do it, and then after those 2 minutes, I'd come away and I'd go, oh, do you know what? Yeah, I actually feel a little bit more upbeat within myself. Now, is it to do with, the fact that we're changing our body, we're changing, our facial expressions, and then therefore that frees up some things in our mind? Potentially. But what I've found is that if we was to start with the mind, which is where most people are focused on, if we start with the mind up here, we're only ever limited to the frequency of where we are. If my frequency sits between a 5 and 6 out of 10 in my energy state, in my emotional state, then I can learn a lot mentally, but the most I'm ever going to get is 5.999999999 out of myself. The guy or gal who's sat next to me, who's on a frequency state of 9 or 10, they all of a sudden, they might not have done as much research of me. They might not have done as much knowledge as me. They might not have had as much understanding as me. But they're going to learn something and implement it and get results much faster because simply of where they are emotionally within their emotional state. And it's the biggest part of where I work with people. Emotional state first, information and knowledge second. Without that in place, that won't ever create the results that people want long term.
So a higher frequency in a person would be somebody who is emotionally strong.
Yes, but strong
or motivated.
Yeah, in a how can I put this? In a not in a way where it's like, someone's vision of strong, which has to mean, 6'4" and tall. No, but I mean strong in the sense of, like I said, the number one thing that of clients who come to see me is they're very emotionally strong. Why? Because there's a part of them that wants something more. They want that new feeling. They want to break out of where they are. They want that commitment, that they're hungry for that. And so that gives them a strength to then, when I introduce some ways to them to change that, they go, yeah, all right, let's do this. That's the key thing. That strength that you spoke about there, I like to call maybe a commitment or a hunger within them to want that for themselves. If that's the case, then I've got some ways that can help.
And for somebody that's coming to you hungry and wanting to move forward, what is the main thing holding them back? Is it anxiety and fear?
At this stage, people come to me with all sorts of different situations with, a broken relationship, a marriage that might be in tatters, a child who, might be misbehaving and they can't understand why, anxiety, fear, OCD, depression, these types of things. People come to me with all sorts of different ways there. And generally, they've tried different things already and they want an approach that allows them to get straight to the crux of where they are emotionally. And so there's a varying range of why people show up these days. It does vary. But like I say, the underlying pattern of what I do, I'm not here to tell anyone how to live. I mean, who am I to tell people what they should and shouldn't do? Everyone's their own free person. What I am here to show them is how to emotionally uncover a part of them that can then deal with the situations of their life with them feeling in control, whether that will be in their marriage or with their child or with their health or with their career. Whatever area it may be, I can show them the part of them that is going to allow them to take control. And that's the most beneficial thing, because then the client knows it's all them. It's not Matt that's done anything. I show them the ways to empower themselves, and that's why it sticks longer term.
And kind of following up on that, what's a way that you can show someone to stop living emotionally in the past and start living today?
Great question. Well, my number one thing is this. I believe that everything in life happens in perfect harmony. Perfect harmony. It is simply our role as humans, as individuals, to find the meaning of it. To find the meaning of it. Because if we look at things on a surface nature, we would never be able to comprehend why some of the things happen in the world the way that they do. You know, some of the things are truly abhorrent. They're completely awful. So I believe that our role is to find the deeper meaning in situations. And oftentimes when people are stuck in the past, they're stuck because they haven't found a deeper meaning to it. They're stuck in that past relationship that ended 20 years ago because they still think of it and they still perceive that relationship or that person in the same way that they did 20 years ago. But what we get to realize is that without that relationship happening and maybe quote unquote failing, that breakdown of that marriage, you wouldn't have this career that now you're incredibly driven about. You wouldn't have kids who are incredibly self-sufficient because they've had to learn that. You wouldn't have this new partner who brings so much love and joy into your life in ways that you didn't experience. You wouldn't have traveled as much as you have done if that had happened. So you see, my encouragement whenever someone comes to me from that particular thing and they say I'm stuck in the past is to obviously help them if there's certain ways in which we're dealing, but also, like I say, I believe things happen in perfect harmony. It is simply our role to find the deeper meaning. If you find the deeper meaning, you have the chokehold of life in your hands, basically, because anything that happens, you recognize, and you can recognize that, okay, even though I might not be able to see it right now, if I can find a deeper meaning to this, I know that this is leading to something for me.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I work with a lot of trauma clients, and they'll all say things like, if I could go in a time machine, I would not experience this horrific event that happened to me. But many of them will say, you know what, this horrible thing happened to me, but I wouldn't own my successful company today if I didn't have the strength that I got post-trauma growth. And I'm always amazed by these people because they'll say that the worst things you can imagine happen to them, but they'll also say, I wouldn't be in this, it sounds odd, but I wouldn't be the successful person I am right now had I not had to get through that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And don't get me wrong, I'm not, hoping things happen in my life or in anyone else's to find
No,
that
for sure.
absolutely not. But you're 100% right. And we see it on, there's public figures, there's people out there who, are creating life-changing ways for people. And they haven't always had necessarily the best things happen to them. They've had their personal traumas, they've had their personal situations. But like you said there with some of the people you would have worked with, they've given a meaning to this to say, you know what, this is absolutely awful what's happened in whatever context that may be, but this doesn't define me. I won't allow it to define me. I'm going to quote unquote use this to allow me to be incredibly successful here, or have a relationship that I care so much about because someone didn't care about me in that relationship. And so, like I say, I believe that our role here is to find the deeper meaning, and that's how we can create peace within ourselves with anything.
And do you believe, as we kind of wind down here, that everybody has the solution within them?
100%. 100%. You know,
It's
my
so
wife,
hard though for people to comprehend that sometimes, right?
it is. It is. And I don't say this through just some sitting here now and working with people. And, like I said, I've lived this. I lived this. And, my wife, if she listens to this, she'll probably be laughing because sometimes we'll be having a discussion about something. And at the time of this recording, my wife and I are moving house and there's a few logistics and things that are going on. And I'll always say there's always an answer. There's always an answer. We just need to find it. There's always a solution. We just need to find it. And I believe that truly, truly, we are the answer without a shadow of a doubt. No matter what situation it is that we are facing personally, we are the answers. I know that there's been some things that have happened to people's lives through no fault or shame or blame on their behalf whatsoever, but they've had to deal with. But your freedom from those situations and circumstances is always within you. We always have a solution. Come back to what was just said previously. We just need to find the meaning and the story and the alignment within ourselves that's going to allow us to feel free.
And that's where seeing somebody like Matt really helps because I like to say we're way too close to our own stuff sometimes to see it clearly. Sometimes we need a complete stranger to pull that out of us.
Without a shadow of a doubt, I've got so many stories around that myself where people close to me who care about me, who love me, have been telling me, Matt, you need to be aware of this. Matt, you need to look at this. I'm thinking of one particular story right now where someone was saying, Matt, the way you're going, you're going to end up in trouble. I was like, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I'll be fine. And then I remember I bumped into an old football coach who I hadn't seen for 10, 11 years. And he asked me, how's things going? And he relayed that exact same information to me that my close family member had been saying to me for years. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. It hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was like, oh, yeah, that really makes sense. My family member was like, what have I been saying for the last 10 years? I've been telling you this. So, but you're right. Sometimes we're too close to it.
I noticed that in being married as well, where my wife will say, guess what? Blah, 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 blah. I'll go, well, I told you that like 5 times. Now this stranger told you, and it's a brilliant solution.
The gift of life, eh?
Exactly. As we wrap up, Matt, what's something, maybe a takeaway for someone who's struggling or feels like they have a block in their life, or they want more, but they just feel like there's a wall? What would you like them to know?
Well, I think apart from obviously the areas of what we've already discussed, I think for anyone to want to feel excited, driven, motivated about their future, they need to have something in line in their mind, in their vision as to what that looks like. If you ask most people, where do you want to be in your career 5 years from now? They might give you an answer. If you ask people, where do you want your relationship or your emotions to be 5 years from now? Sorry, do you mean my emotions? Where do you want them to be? And oftentimes we don't approach these in the same way. And so that would be my encouragement for anyone listening to this, is to say, not even 5 years, in the next month, in the next 3, 6 months, where would you like to be emotionally? Feeling what more? Feeling more confidence, more joy, more purpose, more passion, more excitement, more love? Great. Well, if that's the case, what's the chokehold right now? What is the key? What is the one thing that you can do? You don't have to see the whole path here, but what is the one thing that you can do to put you on track to putting those wheels in motion? If it's to feel more love in your life, great. Who do you need to contact? If it's to feel more confidence, great. Who do you need to talk to? If it's to feel more drive and determination, brilliant. What is it you need to understand about your work or your relationship? What is it that you can do? What is the emotion you want to feel more of? And what's the number one thing that you can do right now to set the wheels in motion? Because what I find with this type of thing is once you create some movement in an area, it creates some momentum. That momentum carries a conviction. Conviction carries power. And then when we feel powerful, we'll create results.
That's
So
really
that,
powerful. I know people goal set and they'll look at, where do I want to be in 6 months, 1 year, 2.5 years, 5 years, but where do you want your emotions to be at those times?
right.
I'm going to do that exercise myself, Matt.
And
I do a regular goal exercise, kind of do it on a certain level, but it's going to, make it a little more concrete now.
yeah, beautiful. I love it because, like I say, emotionally, once we feel full and vibrant emotionally, the limitations, well, there aren't any. We're boundless. We're endless in what we can do in our career, relationship, finances, health, you name it. So, like I say, I truly believe that emotional freedom is the greatest gift any of us can have, because then you can take you anywhere. So that's what I would encourage.
And as we wrap this up, I just wanted to mention we will put all of Matt's links at the bottom of the podcast. So if you want to reach out to him and connect with him, you can. And Matt, I'd like to do this again sometime. It was really great because I feel like we just scratched the surface.
For sure. And I really appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the platform you've created here, James. So yeah, for sure. Thank you very much as well.
Great. Well, you have a good rest of the day, and we will hopefully talk soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Matt.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Meet Your Mental Helper. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. If you'd like to learn more about our guest, you can find them on our guest directory at meetyourmentalhelper.com. You can find their social media links to follow them and also ways to directly contact them. If you would like to be on the podcast, join our Meet Your Mental Helper network. And we have several memberships that support the work we do that allow unknown experts to be seen. Look forward to hearing from you soon and see you at our next podcast.